Chapter 12. Gather your things together, you're moving out now, screamed one of the female guards. Corrie looked at Betsy and breathed a sigh of relief. If they were taking their belongings with them, then probably they were really going to be transferred somewhere and not just lined up outside and shot like the men had been. So the two sisters stuffed their meager belongings into a pillowcase. There was a small bottle of vitamin drops from a Red Cross parcel. It was nearly empty, but they were trying to stretch it as far as possible. Nolly had sent Betsy a blue woolen sweater. Amazingly, the package containing it had reached her en route. Corrie stuffed the sweater into the pillowcase. Their belongings barely made a bump in the bottom of the pillowcase as Corrie swung it over her shoulder. The only other thing they owned was too precious to put in the pillowcase. It was the small Bible Nolly had given Corrie at the reading of their father's will. Betsy had made a small cloth pouch for it in the sewing room, and it always hung around one of their necks. Nolly had given Betsy a Bible at the same time, but Betsy had given it to another needy woman. So now she and Corrie shared Corrie's Bible. Their belongings in hand, the two sisters lined up for one last roll call at Voot concentration camp. After roll call, the women were marched 5 abreast out of the camp. A large truck was parked at the gate. As each line of prisoners marched past the truck, it was stopped for a moment, and every woman in line was handed a blanket. This made no sense to Corrie. They had just left blankets in their barrack, so why take the time to hand out new ones? Corrie couldn't think of an answer, but then so many things the Germans did made no sense to her. Since the blankets were thick, much too heavy for Betsy to carry in her weakened state, Corrie carried Betsy's blanket as well as her own as they marched away from the camp. The women retraced the route they had marched to Voot from the train. When they reached the railroad tracks, a guard ordered them to halt. Corrie peered up and down the track but saw no passenger train like the one that had brought them from Schwenningen, only a line of large boxcars. German soldiers were perched on top of them, their machine guns pointed at the women. Once, Corrie would have been terrified if someone had pointed a gun at her. Now she thought nothing of it. The woman to the left of Corrie looked up at the soldiers. "What does it matter if they shoot us now? We're all going to die anyway," she said. Corrie reached out her hand to comfort the woman. She wanted to say, "That's not true. Don't think like that." But it would be a lie. After all, look at what the Nazis had done to the men the day before. A tall, dark-haired soldier marched the length of the train, unlocking the boxcars and sliding their doors open. Corrie gasped. She knew what was going to happen. All the women, about 1,000 of them, were going to be pushed into the boxcars, which had no windows or seats, and weren't designed to carry animals, much less human beings. "Move it, you old cows! We gotta get 80 of you in each car!" a guard near Corrie yelled. Corrie felt a gun press into her back, and together the women surged onto the boxcar. Several of them had to help Betsy up, as it was too high for her to climb. Once inside, they moved as far back as they could, as more women were ordered into the boxcar. Finally, when Corrie could hardly breathe, the door was slid shut. The women were alone in total darkness. At first, they all panicked. Women screamed and clawed at the walls, but after about an hour, they calmed down enough to organize themselves. They found that if each woman sat with her legs apart like a bobsled, there was enough room for them all to sit on the floor of the boxcar. They tucked their blankets around themselves and waited. During the rest of the day, the boxcar was shunted backwards and forwards, never moving more than a few feet in either direction, as the boxcars were connected to form a long train. Inside, women needed to go to the bathroom, but there was no bucket, and no way to climb over the wall of bodies to get to one, even if there had been. They had no choice but to go right where they were sitting. Corrie didn't know which was worse, the embarrassment or the stench, which means a stink, bad odor. By nightfall, some of the women sitting near the sides of the boxcar had managed to gouge some small holes in the timber, and some fresh air trickled in. About the same time, the women heard popping noises against the outside of the boxcar. They all sat still and listened. "Sounds like hailstones," whispered one of the women. "No, it's not on the roof. It's just hitting the side of the car," said another woman. "Machine guns," said yet another woman. They were being fired upon. This could mean only one thing. The Allied forces must be very close. Excitement filled the boxcar. At any moment, the doors could be flung open and they could be free. But neither happened. Half an hour later, they felt the train begin to move, slowly at first, then gathering speed. The excitement left the boxcar as quickly as it had come. The women sat in silence. There was no need to say anything. It was obvious. They were headed east into Germany. Where else was there left to take them? "Why are they bothering to take us to Germany? We're a group of weak, half-starved Dutch women. Why would they waste a train trip on us?" Corrie asked out loud. No one in the boxcar could think of an answer. The train sped on. The boxcar smelled so disgusting that Corrie had to force herself to breathe. The woman near the holes in the side of the boxcar yelled out to notify the others when it got dark or light. First, one night passed, then another, and then a third. Finally, the train ground to a halt. The women heard the sound of the boys yelling in German, and then the door began to the boxcar slid open. Corrie raised her arm to shield her eyes from the intense light that spilled in. The pressure of 80 women packed into such a tiny space pushed out those near the door. The women fell the 4 feet onto the stones beside the railroad track. More of the women inside the boxcar crawled toward the fresh air. They were all too exhausted to do anything more than fall out of the doorway on top of the others. Soon there were large piles of women outside the doors of every boxcar in the train. Slowly, the stronger women pulled themselves free of the piles. There was a small lake about 20 feet from the train, and the women began to crawl towards it. Corrie was one of them. She left Betsy in the pile of women and promised to come back for her. Over the rough rocks she crawled, her knees bleeding as she went, her eyes fixed firmly on the water in front of her. Finally, Corrie collapsed beside the lake. She sank her face in the water. How wonderful it felt! She let it lap over her hair and around her neck. She gulped mouthfuls of it. All along the lake edge, other women were doing the same. After a few minutes, Corrie felt strong enough to sit up. She looked around. Unlike the guards in Holland, who were grown men and women, the guards here were teenage boys. Some of them didn't even look 15 years old. Corrie shook her head. Over 1,000 women were being controlled by 7 teenage boys with guns. In truth, there was no need for more than 7 guards. None of the women had the strength to resist. One of the young guards, carrying a pile of canvas bags — canvas means a firm, closely woven cloth — threw one down near Corrie. "Carry water," he barked at Corrie in German. Corrie dipped the bag into the lake and stood up. Her whole body wobbled as she staggered back to the train with the water. Betsy had managed to crawl a little distance from the pile of other women. Corrie found her and poured some of the water over her. "Thank you," she mouthed through her cracked lips. Corrie went on, pouring water into the other prisoners' mouths. Some of them, though, were unconscious, and the eyes of others were rolled back in their sockets. Corrie knew they were dead.